Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's event, which is going to be an exciting one. I am Pat Ford from the University of Florida. I am also a proud board member of the Museum of Public Relations, the only museum of public relations in the world, which is co-sponsoring tonight's event with the Diversity Action Alliance. And I am co-chair of the Diversity Action Alliance as well. And I'm delighted to welcome you to this extraordinary event with an incredible lineup of leaders to talk about really a topic that is front and center in our profession right now. This is the latest in a series of diversity-themed events by the museum, honoring not only Black pioneers and leaders in our field, but also women, Latinos, Asian American, Pacific Islanders, and LGBT community, among others. I myself was honored to serve as the MC for the first such event 4 years ago, actually 4 years ago tonight, in the midst of a almost near blizzard in New York City, where undaunted by that storm, and thanks to the support from Renee Edelman, who got us the Edelman space to use in that storm, we had a big event with some of the panelists that are going to be speaking tonight as well. And that has really begun a spirited discussion in our field on the need for recognition, more recognition of Black and other leaders and pioneers from diverse communities whose leadership and inspiration has not been sufficiently reflected in PR textbooks and literature and in the field. People like Inez Kaiser and Moss Kendricks and Ofiel Dukes. So tonight, we're holding the 6th event in that series of Black History Month webinars or conferences and webinars. And the topic just becomes more relevant and more urgent with each year, as evidenced by the amazing amount of response we got for tonight. As of a little while ago, there were 685 people signed up to take part in this event tonight. And so that's far more than the typical one. Before we get started tonight, let me express our appreciation to the generous sponsors that have made this event possible. They include the Grady College of Journalism and Mass Communication at the University of Georgia, Weber Shandwick, the George Washington University Graduate School of Political Management, Reagan Communications, Peppercom, Page, the Arthur Page Society, Talkwalker, Cision, Georgetown University School of Continuing Education, Public Relations and Corporate Communication, APCO Worldwide, the PR Council, James Lukashevsky, Compro, Joyful Planet, Bob Veritoni, Renee S. Edelman, and Muckrack. Thank you all very much for making this possible. And let me just say, as somebody who's really been involved in the museum activities for quite a while, please consider supporting this museum in the future. We're digitizing the history of this profession right now and holding many more events like this, and including many more this year on topics that are somewhat similar. And so with that, let me get started with the program. Let us get started with the program, and allow me to please turn this over to Carmella Glover, the Executive Director of the Diversity Action Alliance. Carmella?
Thank you, Pat, for those eloquent remarks. And welcome everyone again to the 6th annual celebration of Black PR history. I'm your hostess for the evening, Carmella Glover, Executive Director of the Diversity Action Alliance. The DAA is a cross-industry coalition of trade organizations working toward a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive PR and comms industry for people of color, as measured by recruitment, retention, and representation at all levels. The DAA, as we call it, primarily asks its signatories to sign a commitment that is grounded in action. In fact, the tenets of the commitment spell out the word act. A, adopt best practices, C, champion in the cause, and T, tracking our progress. The spirit of the DAA is to hold the industry's leaders accountable for accelerated progress. For more information and to join the 400 plus organizations and individuals who have pledged their commitment, visit the www.diversityactionalliance.org. I do want to thank the Museum of PR for curating this fantastic repertoire of heritage and identity events over the past few years. Today's event is the first virtual one for the Black PR history events that the museum has. If you talk to Shelley about the very first Black history event in 2017, it is a tale of snowstorms and canceled flights, but a resilience that resulted in bus rides across state lines and the beginnings of a tradition that would bring us to a well-attended annual event that today already has over 300 people registered, over 600 people registered, and 300 people who are currently here. So a quick funny story, as the Museum of PR team and I chatted the past few weeks about the event, and as a former engineer, I'll tell you, who finds a way to calculate something in every conversation, I couldn't figure out why we were calling this the 6th annual event if the first one was in 2017. That would make this the 5th event. But the fun fact about this is that there were actually 2 events in the first year. Just in case some of my data and number crunching PR folks out there were already wondering the same. The first event in February of 2017 did feature Dr. Rochelle Ford and Dr. Denise Hill, who are also speaking today. Also Judith Harrison of Weber Shandwick, Rick Kaiser, who's the son of the first Black woman to own a PR firm, Inez Kaiser. He was a special guest speaker and was honored at the event along with Ofield Dukes, Moss Kendricks, and several others. This event's origin is rooted in what PR and comms folks are experts in: storytelling and crisis. Stories are important. For centuries, the stories of African descendants were oral histories told by their elders. In West African culture, they're called griots, and they were the storytellers who preserved our roots. In many families, it might still be an experience during family get-togethers around the dinner table, for example. The crisis is twofold. Without documentation, our stories have a high probability of being lost. Without preserving Black PR history, we risk continuing to not see ourselves in this industry's framework and leadership, which seeks to reach and resonate with a population that is increasingly Black and brown. Notably, the museum's monumental digitization project, which Pat also mentioned, is memorializing the relics in its collection and making them available to anyone, anywhere, for generations to come. Included in these important artifacts are the stories of Black PR pioneers who would not otherwise be cemented in the chronicles of PR history. What we don't document and preserve can be lost and diluted over time. The digitization project is serving a noble and critical purpose. I wish someone could have articulated to me the level of criticality of history in my youth. What seemed to be rote mechanical memorization of dates to me as a high school student has now become consequential, playing out in real time. History is a calibration point by which we can measure both how much has changed and how little has changed. There was importance behind every date we learned. The beauty of tonight is that not only will we reflect on history, but we will get to hear the narratives that are so important for contextual understanding of the Black experience and how to navigate workplace challenges, whether you identify as an ally, a champion, or a person of color. These insights are coming from a handful of PR leaders who are walking Black history. I hope tonight will help you understand why you hear leaders saying that we are not a monolith, even under the umbrella of our Blackness. I hope tonight removes fears of not knowing, instills the courage in you to ask questions and share your thought processes. Finally, I hope tonight underscores the importance of civility because we are all human. We're all shaped by our experiences and the experiences of those who came before us. Without further ado, we're going to begin tonight's program. I am delighted to introduce our keynote speaker, Charlene Wheeless. Charlene is a well-known leader in the communications and PR industry. She is currently the Senior Advisor of Equity and Justice at APCO Worldwide and is in her second term as the chair of the Page Society. Both positions she took on following more than 33 years in the industry and 20 plus years as a C-suite leader. Charlene's debut book, You Are Enough: Reclaiming Your Career and Your Life Purpose with Passion and Unapologetic Authenticity, will be published this spring. As a C-suite leader, Charlene has lived the experience of being a Black female executive at several global organizations. The accumulation of her skills and experiences has positioned her as a cornerstone in ensuring anti-racist practices, inclusivity, and diversity in corporate environments. Charlene combines her extensive knowledge of leadership and communications and her skill in managing adversity to help others learn to retain authenticity in business and life. Charlene, welcome. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Carmella. It is a pleasure to be here. So thank you. You know, when I started my career in 1987, I was very excited. My first real job. Every morning, I gladly woke up, put on my work suit, my sensible heels, tied my little floppy kitty bow around my collar. It was the 80s, don't judge, and grabbed my briefcase. The only thing in it was my lunch, but everyone serious had a briefcase, so I did too. And just before leaving my apartment, I would grab my suit of armor off my coat rack. It was invisible, of course. It's a bit ill-fitting, but it was my shield, the protection I needed to deal with the myriad of macro and microaggressions that I would face day in and day out. You know, the subtle acts of aggression that leave you feeling marginalized, discounted, ignored, and even invisible. Like no matter who we are, we're not enough. And for women of color, it's worse. Studies show that women of color feel it even more because not only do we experience subtle and not so subtle acts of aggression, we are reminded that we don't belong nearly every day. I know that feeling, and I don't think I'm alone. I know what it's like to be marginalized and discounted. And I know what it's like to be made to feel invisible. Usually when I say that, people look at me as if to say, what do you know about being discounted or invisible? You're successful. You've climbed the corporate ladder and made it to the C-suite. What do you have to worry about? My response? Everything. Just because you have a seat at the table doesn't mean you're welcome there. Those acts of micro and macro aggression still happen. The road hasn't become easier, it just becomes different. So what are we supposed to do? Give in to systems of oppression of sexism, racism, and any other ism we can think of? No. We learn to cope, we learn to be resilient, and we learn to persevere. Tonight, there are many audiences represented here: students, academicians, media, business leaders, CCOs, and CEOs, and we all have a role to play in making life better for all, in making life just. But there are a few things that we have to get out of the way first. Let's recognize the system is not broken. It works exactly as it was intended, to elevate some and marginalize others. And we've recently seen the lengths some people will go to ensure that system stays in place. Well, it's time. No, it is past time to change the system, not just try to fix it. Let's also stop focusing on the wrong problem and put our attention toward the right one: systemic racism and injustice. If equity and justice for all existed, there would be no need for DE&I. And let's ask ourselves, how a nation that can put a man on the moon, create alternative energy sources and life-saving medicines and treatments in record time can't solve 400 years or even just 50 years of inequality and injustice? Surely we can do better. And we must, because after the past 12 months, there is no going back. People are looking for the message that they belong, that they are part of something, that they are seen and heard, that despite or perhaps because of their experience, they are valued. And they will settle for nothing less. You know, my generation has been somewhat patient with incremental progress. This next generation of trailblazers are not. They are watching, they are listening, and they are going to keep us all accountable. And that is some of the best news of all. I long for the day that no one feels that they need a suit of armor just to go to work or exist in this world. But tonight is not about rehashing all that is wrong. Tonight is about honoring the people who have paved the way to progress and whose shoulders we stand today. What we revere in these Black leaders, in all leaders really, is not only that they persevere, but that they inspire others to do the same. So let us celebrate Black pioneers whose perseverance made the road a little less difficult for those who would follow. But let us also celebrate the everyday heroes who are here with us today, because it is your courageous rejection of the status quo in ways large and small that is chipping away at the scourge of systemic racism and injustice. It is fitting that we pay this tribute during Black History Month. And in the spirit of authenticity, I have to tell you, I don't want to matter for just a month. I want to matter for 365 days a year and 366 every 4. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charlene. What amazing remarks, a powerful and moving address. My favorite part of that was the courageous rejection of the status quo, which will chip away at the scourge that is systemic racism and injustice. That was a powerful line right there. I wrote that one down. Thank you. Next in our program, we will hear about the history of Black History Month and Carter G. Woodson from Dr. Denise Hill. Denise is a strategic communications executive, educator, researcher, historian, and former chief communications officer with more than 25 years of experience in developing and managing award-winning strategic communications programs. She's a bit of a unicorn with corporate agency and consulting firm experience in addition to her academic tenure. She serves on several industry boards and recently co-authored the first ever book chapter on Inez Kaiser with Shelley in a new book entitled Women in PR History. Denise, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Carmella. I am delighted to have the opportunity to speak to you today about the history of Black History Month. Any conversation about the history of Black History Month must begin with Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who is called the father of Black history. Dr. Woodson was a historian, an educator, a journalist, and author. He was born in 1875, the son of former slaves. He passed away in 1950. Dr. Woodson dedicated his life to ensuring that African-American contributions were included in US history because previously they had not been. Dr. Woodson started his full-time formal education, and I think this is important to know given his accomplishments. He started his full-time formal education at the age of 20. He had started school as a youngster and had fits and starts because he had to work, and he worked in the coal mines of Virginia. However, went full-time at age 20 to high school, later received a BA and MA from the University of Chicago, and received a Ph.D. in history in 1912 from Harvard University, the second African American after W.E.B. Du Bois to do so. So after graduating, Dr. Woodson went on to teach. But one of the things that we want to know about is what got him involved in history, because he initially was not right away involved in history. He was involved more in education. So in 1915, he and some associates attended an event in Illinois, and it was a Jubilee celebration. It was the 50th anniversary of emancipation, 1865 to 1950. And after attending this event, Carter Woodson and his associates realized there was an opportunity to make sure that African-American contributions to history were being told, because previously they had not been. So he and his associates in 1915, after attending this event, formed what was then called the Association for Negro Life and History. And this organization was focused on scientific research and sociological research. Dr. Woodson believed that by conducting scientific research and getting data, that the contributions of African Americans would be of interest and would counter what white historians had been doing, which was completely ignoring and or falsifying and denigrating the contributions of African Americans in history. Basically, white historians believed that African Americans had no place in history. So Dr. Carter Woodson and the association focused on studying people of African descent with the ultimate goal of making sure that if everybody knew about the accomplishments of African Americans, they would recognize that African Americans did indeed contribute. And ultimately, Dr. Woodson wanted to use this to promote harmony among all races. So he set about, he and his associates, through his research, through this scientific historical research, set about and he sought Black achievements and Black contributions because he wanted to correct the historical record. He believed, he knew that African American achievements were indeed worthy of inclusion in US history, contradicting what white historians believed and what they were perpetuating. Dr. Woodson believed that the more you really know of somebody, the less likely you are to hold prejudices against that person or group of people. The Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, again, founded in 1915, is still in existence today. It is now called the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. However, it is still focused on researching and publishing that research of African American life and African American history. That says something, that that organization that he founded in 1915 is still in existence. A year later, he founded a journal that focused on scholarship and focused on publishing this research. And that journal, founded in 1916, similar to the association, is still in existence today. It is the Journal of African American History, and it is still publishing scholarship on the contributions of African Americans. 10 years later, Dr. Woodson founded Negro History Week. He initially called it Negro Achievement Week. A lot of his research focused on uncovering achievements of Black Americans. And the success of the first one, and notice when he had it, it's February 7th through the 13th in 1926. The success of the first event resulted in Woodson saying, we are going to do this every year. And Woodson focused on a public education campaign involving businesses, involving students, involving teachers. And at the second Black History event, Woodson said, it's not so much Negro History Week. He said, it's a history week. what we should be emphasizing is not Black history, but the role of African Americans in history. So even then in 1927, he recognized it's not Black history, it's history. And then on the third anniversary of Negro History Week, he said the purpose is really not to eulogize African Americans or to decry others, but to make sure that African Americans have their proper place in history. Again, he wanted a unified history. He did not want a separate history for whites and Blacks and for everyone else. And a scholar later said at the time that Woodson and his associates with Black History Week, Negro History Week, they celebrated the week, but they hoped for the year. So we are not at the year. So Woodson's Black History Week from 1926, 50 years later in 1976, it was declared Black History Month. And that is where we are today. So the work of Carter G. Woodson with his journal, with his association, dedicating his entire life to recognizing the importance of Black history, we are celebrating today. And as Charlene mentioned, we don't want a week or a month. Again, African American accomplishments are part of US history. So one thing that we need to keep in mind as we look at the history of Black History Month is history keeps people and events and change alive long after those people are gone, long after those events have transpired. And Carter G. Woodson wanted to make sure that history could not be used as yet another tool to denigrate, to violate, to omit African Americans. And instead, he made sure that African Americans were acknowledged and appreciated and recognized and exalted. And that is where we are today. So let us make sure that we take a moment and recognize the work of Carter G. Woodson, who dedicated his life to this. And that is where we are today. And we should also celebrate ourselves. We should celebrate all of us, not just on this panel, but all of you who are participating in this event. We are all doing what Carter G. Woodson did. We are all making history. So those who come after us, we are doing what those who came before us did. And we are making history for the next generation. So as we celebrate Black History Month, let us recognize that history is happening right now and that we owe a debt to Carter G. Woodson and to the first Black History Month. And we are continuing the work of that first Black History Month as we tonight make history for the next generation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Denise. I certainly learned something new. It is absolutely extraordinary that Dr. Woodson was interested in the data as evidence of the contribution of African Americans. That evokes for me the plethora of research justifying diversity as a business imperative today and how we still need to use it to convince some leadership that it's important. He was truly a visionary. The sentiments and plights in the early 20th century are really not much different than what we see today. It's proof that we still have work to do. Next up, we have two power panels with overarching themes of these two panels being, one, how far we've come, and two, how far we have to go. So a great segue from Denise's excellent presentation. Moderating both of today's panels is the incomparable Dr. Rochelle Ford, Dean of the School of Communications at Elon University. Rochelle has also served in leadership at Syracuse and Howard Universities. She's an award-winning communication and DEI expert. Rochelle was most recently honored by ColorCom in the 2021 announcement of the ColorCom 28. Throughout the 28 days of Black History Month, this honor celebrates Black woman communicators who have broken glass ceilings, forged new positions, and have left their mark on history. And Rochelle is well deserving of that. Rochelle, I'll turn it over to you to introduce the panel and the highlight of this evening's event.
Thank you so much, Carmella, and thank you for all your leadership. Denise, what an amazing overview. I was taking notes just like a scholar should. And Charlene, your personal testimony is great. And if you all haven't purchased a copy of Diverse Voices, it is a book that was produced by the Museum of Public Relations. And if you are enjoying what you heard, heard already and what you're going to hear on this panel, make sure you get a copy of that. Proceeds go to help with scholarships and work in diversity, equity, inclusion of the PRSA Foundation. So at this point, I am so excited to introduce our panel. And so they will join me as they turn on their cameras. We have Troy Blackwell, who is a candidate for the New York City Council, District 15, and a former Biden-Harris 2020 Obama White House alum. So we're excited to have you, Troy. Sabrina Browne, Account Director from BCW, as well as the Girl Scouts of America Board. And we have Dr. Candace Steele Flippin, and she is a Senior Vice President and Chief Communications Officer for Acuity Brands. And we have Damon Jones. He is the Chief Communications Officer for Procter & Gamble. And so what I'd like our panelists to do is for you all to introduce yourselves. Tell us, how long have you been working in this industry and what has made you want to stay? What has been that sticking power? So why don't we begin, ladies first? We'll go with Sabrina.
Yes, good evening, everyone. I am Sabrina Browne, an account director at BCW Global. I also oversee our African American Employee Resource Group for North America across 10 markets. So I'm thrilled to be here this evening and share a little bit about my experience as a Black woman working in the PR industry. I've been working in PR for more than a decade now. I've worked with many of the brands you love to shop, eat, drink, and probably bank with your money. In terms of why I'm here, I'm an agent of change. I believe that I can be the change and also create the change. For me, Black History Month is a time for us to reflect. It's a time for us to be accountable, and it's a time for us to be courageous. On the heels of Kamala Harris's appointment, becoming the first Black and Southeast Asian African-American woman in general to serve in the highest office in the land, we all have a little bit more courage, a little bit more motivation, a little bit more inspiration, but there's still so much work to do. So I'm excited to talk about that work tonight with all of you, and I'm excited to encourage you all to be the change in your workplace, in your schools, and in your communities as well.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. We need to be the change that we want to see. And so you, Candace, can you introduce yourself? Tell us, how long have you been in the industry and what has given you that sticking power?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Candace Steele Flippin. Thank you for joining us this evening. I am the Senior Vice President of and Chief Communications Officer for Acuity Brands. We are an industrial technology company. And I've been in this industry for over 25 years, and I'm still here because I was really blessed to be set up very well. I had an incredible mentor, James Farmer, who at the time was a vice president of communications in the GM organization. You're smiling. He was an amazing mentor, and he took me as a lump of clay and helped mold me and forged by lots of opportunity to point a direction to the top for me. And he made it very clear that I could go as far as I wanted to. So it was never a decision point for me to step away. And so he set me on a good path. And along the way, I have been mentored and sponsored by some incredible, absolutely stellar PR professionals all the time, even recently, including our keynote speaker, Charlene Wheeless, who's taken me under her tutelage as my career has grown. And along that way, I've had a chance to give back and bring people with me. So as our first speaker said, creating that change, I'm here because I've been a part of that change. And I'm really excited to share my story and to share my knowledge and experience with the hope that it'll help continue to keep others in our profession, because our diverse perspective matters.
You're absolutely right. Our perspective matters in mentors and sponsors and coaches. And I'm going to give a definition because I know there's a lot of young people out there that may not know the difference. So a mentor is someone who is going to walk alongside you. They're going to encourage you, give you advice, support you. It makes a nice sounding board for you as you walk along your career. Sponsors are the ones who open the door for you. And they are like, here's an opportunity. You are prepared. I'm going to introduce you. And they open the door for you to walk through, but you've got to be prepared to walk through that door because it's their name that is helping you to gain access to that room, to that client, to that opportunity. And then also you have coaches who literally instruct you, just like in Little League. They show you how to shoot the ball. They show you how to hit the ball. Well, a coach in your career will tell you how to write, how to edit, how to pitch, how to do things. And we need to have those three type of people in our lives. So Candace, thank you for sharing how you were mentored and how you were sponsored. And I bet you have coached some employees and young people along the way as well to know this is how we do it. So thank you for passing it along. So Troy, you're one of the newer practitioners on the panel. Why don't you introduce yourself and say how long you've been in the industry?
Sure. Well, I'm super happy to be here. Thank you to Shelly and Carmella for organizing this. I'm Troy Blackwell. I'm currently a candidate for City Council, District 15 here in New York City, but my background is in communications. I've been doing communications and PR for about 10 years now. And the reason that I stayed in this field for so long is I've just been motivated to run towards challenges, not run away from challenges. And I've had really great mentors, to Candace's point. I believe one of my mentors might be on now, but Art Stevens was someone who was a mentor to me when I was an undergrad, and just seeing how inspiring he is, the advice that he gives to those he has mentored, it's just motivating. And so I always think about those great mentors that I've had that said, you know, you can do these things just because something is challenging. Again, run towards it, don't run away from it. Having a seat at the table is always of importance. And again, going back to what this theme is about, having diverse voices at the table is always important. So that's why I've always stayed within the comms realm for the last 10 years.
Awesome. I love how you are running towards the challenge, and that's how we make change. And I think our final panelist, as he does his introduction, he not only is running towards those challenges, but he is reforming that challenge so that everything he touches, it turns into a thought-provoking moment to enhance the brands, enhance conversations. Okay, I'm a super fan girl. I just want you to say that, just to know, in case you don't know, I'm one of your fangirls. I'm fanning out right here. So, David.
How you doing, Dr. Ford? Good evening, everyone. I'm Damon Jones. I lead I'm Chief Communications Officer and lead our global advocacy portfolio at Procter & Gamble. I've been in the industry for, let's say, between 20 and 25 years. I'll put myself in that range. And it was interesting because I, growing up, didn't know much about communications, didn't know much about PR, actually chose to study journalism. And then an opportunity arose, and it was kind of like, well, it's similar. Let me get in and give it a try. And really, what I fell in love with was really the understanding is that the communications has such ability to connect people and to really shape how people see each other and see themselves and see the world around them. And I wanted to have a positive impact on that. Right. And so that's how it started. And so, how it's going now is I've been around because I found meaningful work and I found supportive communities, whether that was a supportive organization, which values that I align with, and supportive people who, poured into me and helped me learn how I could be impactful, both individually as a communications leader, but also organizationally, not only leveraging my individual voice, but leveraging, in this case, the voice of my employer, who happens to be, one of the world's largest, advertisers. So for me, where I've always tried to connect that passion is, making sure that I am working on people, places, and things that I care about, and that I get up every morning knowing that the work that I can do can have a really meaningful impact on people that I care about. And if I can do that today so that I can create a better future for people who realize it and people who may not realize it, I've just found a passion in that work. So much of what we do as communications is often seen as invisible work. because we really sit at the intersection of what is and what can be. And so that ability to shape how an organization engages with its publics, how leaders engage with their publics, recognizing that that is just an opportunity to amplify my impact. And I've enjoyed the ride.
And I think that it can be an enjoyable ride, and having those communities. I think Sabrina said she leads their ERG. And so for those who don't know, that's an employee resource group. They also will call them affinity groups, where you can have like-minded people to come together and to share and to support each other, because there's some conversations you don't really want to have out in the open. You want to talk to people who are like you, and those employee resource groups can be very, very helpful. Candace, I would love to start with you with one of the questions here. And we have heard a lot of literature that says, you know, with the microaggressions and systemic racism and things like that, are there any workplace challenges that are really no longer, they no longer exist for African Americans or Black professionals? Or
I am not aware of that. I believe that everything that unfortunately happens can happen to us. The difference is just walking into that situation with an open mind and having a support system and making a commitment to yourself to show up and be your authentic self as someone who deserves to be honored, respected, heard, validated in the workplace. Now, there are laws that are available to protect workers. So absolutely. But the reality is, unfortunately, as long as bias exists, we are vulnerable. And I don't look at that in a negative way. One, because I'm an optimist. And two, is because knowledge helps you understand how to navigate a situation. So, you know, perhaps there's someone who knows this utopia place where Black people have this amount of Teflon barrier where we're not subjected to unfair treatment. We're not finding ourselves in rooms where we say something to be dismissed and only to have someone else say it, or to have our opinions not respected. But that shouldn't stop us. You know, I feel grateful that, you know, my parents grew up in the Jim Crow South, and they decided that they wanted a different path for their children. But more importantly, they painted a picture for us that in spite of what's happening here, you can still go and get what's for you. And I encourage people to have fortitude or to get help if you find yourself in one of those situations. Now, as an executive, and having served as an executive for many companies, I can tell you that, you know, in C-suites and in senior leadership roundtables around the globe and here in America, people are having conversations about doing what's right for their workforce. One, because it's right for business. It usually aligns to a corporate mission and value statement. But as we see played out in our own country, there's still individuals who carry their own ideologies wherever they go. And if our US Capitol can't be safe, it's hard for me to sit here and authentically tell you that there are spaces where we can't be vulnerable. That's just my truth. I don't like it.
I appreciate your sharing that. And I think that that's a reality check. But like you said, you can't think about your restraints, right? You kind of know the environment that you're going into, and then you figure out how you can make it through, right? And I appreciate that. I want to follow up on this with Sabrina, and I'm also going to include a question from Kaylee Coward as part of this. But when we think about companies and their attempts to dismantle systematic racism and inequities, what barriers exist? And then also, is it better then to change people's hearts, or do we need to change the institutions? And I guess it's a three-part question, because I added, you know, her part on, but is it realistic to accelerate the removal of these barriers?
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Ford. I would say that at where we are today in the public relations industry, especially from the agency perspective, it's critical that we address these barriers, that we address these systemic inequalities. Gone are the days where we can just say, well, that's an HR issue. It's really about that cross-organizational approach, C-suite working in tandem with HR, with policy, with the various legal departments at your organization to make sure that employees are not only seen, heard, and valued, but that they're respected in the workplace. And that last aspect of it is key. It's challenging for me as a woman, for me as a Belgian West African woman, to see so much injustice occurring in our industry and across the country. But I'm honored, I'm motivated, I'm inspired in knowing that the work is getting done with the individuals who are on this panel, but also with the leaders that we're working with, the C-suite that we're working with as well. In terms of dismantling, I think that's a broader question for all of us to take it upon ourselves to lean into both allyship and action. It's a twofold approach. While I want to say this work is on the burden of the Black community to get it done, we need to make sure that we're bringing our allies to the table. If there's one thing I've learned over the course of my career, it's not always going to be the people who look like you that are working with you to get the work done. So leaning into allies, taking that collective action together to dismantle those barriers of inequality within your workplace, within your agency, and within your organization is key. And then I would say just the final question I believe you had asked in terms of brands and corporations, we all have a role in responding to this, and that includes the clients that I serve every single day, as well as the clients that I'm sure many people who are on this panel and in the chat are serving as well. I think it's important to recognize that racial injustice in the Black community, it's reached a tipping point, fueled by those years of systemic oppression, repeated incidences of police brutality and political unrest. So now every single brand, every corporation must really take that time to assess where they're going to stand on the issues, how they're going to join the conversation strategically, but also make a long-term impact. Because this isn't about the short-term gain. It's about that long-term trust and commitment to the Black stakeholder.
And I appreciate that we have to have organizations to take a stand, and it takes everyone in the organization, no matter what your race, gender, ethnicity, orientation, what have you, it takes everyone at the table. And one of the things I think is that the second part of that question, and Damon, you've been a part of helping the nation have these conversations and bringing it from the advertiser's perspective and say, no, you need to talk about this at home. And so I would love for you to talk a little bit about that. But as Sabrina said, and Charlene and others alluded to, this summer, the world kind of set on fire, right? When we saw, George Floyd literally be murdered in front of us. And all of a sudden, a lot of brands started hashtagging, right? But not necessarily doing the action that Sabrina called for, but Procter & Gamble, y'all have been doing actions and having this conversation beforehand. So what I want to hear about, why was it important to take consumers, not just Black consumers, but all on this personal journey? And then also how is this moment, or do you seeing it different from this summer after witnessing George Floyd's death?
Yeah, I mean, I think to start where Sabrina is we cannot solve any problem until we first can acknowledge that it exists, right? And for companies and for many in this country, you have to acknowledge that directly or indirectly, intentionally or not, many institutions have been complicit in institutional racism, right? And racism is just a hard thing to hear. It's a hard thing to talk about. It makes people uncomfortable in all sorts of ways, right? But once you can acknowledge that it exists, acknowledge that institution has a role in being complicit at some level, and then you can move on to talk about your responsibility to begin to fix it, right? And frankly, that's been the soul-searching journey that we've been on as an institution. We're the world's largest advertiser, right? And when you think about the images that we put into people's homes every day, when you see someone called beautiful in an ad, and that person is, beautiful because she's got blonde hair and blue eyes, and you do that for generation after generation after generation, you should not wonder why the world has a certain definition of beauty, right? And so we've recognized that there have been these biases that exist, and we've recognized that we've needed to do something about it, right? And so we've created a number of programs. One of the long-running programs is called My Black is Beautiful, which is a program that fundamentally teaches young Black girls that there is no single standard of beauty, no matter what your hair looks like, your skin looks like, your body shape looks like. We are all beautiful in our own ways, right? But then to be able to educate, not only the African American community in this case, but the broader community of, well, why do we expect certain things? Why do we say certain things? Because that's what we've been conditioned to do for years, right? And so just challenging many of those stereotypes and the norms, first and foremost, by ensuring that we accurately represent and portray all people in our advertising, and making sure that we do that and talk openly about what we've learned, so that not only do we get better, we help other people get better. But on Dr. Ford, the issue that you talked about of addressing bias and racism, bringing that really front and center, and that's what we tried to do through a number of short films and commercials. You've probably seen some of them, The Talk or The Look, or most recently The Choice. And each of these are, in their own way, designed to make people slightly uncomfortable, to challenge why they think what they think, and then to reflect on why. Well, why does a mother have to have a conversation with a young Black child about his or her intersections with the police, or interactions with the police? Well, that's because there is the reality of what Black and brown people are faced with in engaging with the police, right? That's not what I want to see, but that is the truth in the matter of the world that we live in, right? So I've got to talk about it to be able to do something about it. And I think most recently what we've been really trying to push forward with is not just saying that's a problem and someone ought to do something about it. It's really moving more people off of the sidelines and into the game, to use a sports analogy, if you will, to say it's not enough to be just not racist. Well, I'm not racist. I didn't own slaves, or whatever that might be. It's kind of, you have to be an anti-racist. You have to actively learn to educate yourselves, to learn the things that perhaps you weren't taught in school, so that you can come at these, systemic issues with a different level of awareness, and with a different commitment to having a different outcome. And so it's really just about being active and challenging the norms and forcing some of these uncomfortable conversations to happen, because until we can, again, talk about it, then we can't really do something about it. And that's the mode that we've been in. And what I'd say is, obviously, we're blessed to have that platform to be able to do, but each of us can do something with where we're at, right? And I think it's amazing that as communicators, we're often charged with helping the companies that we work for, the organizations that we work for, create a narrative about what we want to say. And when we're doing that, we should first be asking the question, well, what are we doing? Am I telling a story that is rooted in meaningful and substantive action? Because I think, come mid-May, and everyone's going to be looking around and saying, well, you put the black box on Instagram, you told me that Black Lives Matter. Tell me what you've done. Show me how you've stepped up. And if you haven't, then, we need to be holding people to account, individuals and institutions alike.
I'm so glad you said that, and I want to applaud the work that you all are doing, because it didn't just start with George Floyd. You've been doing it for a long time, and I appreciate that. I also like that we are bringing that conversation inside and letting our associates at Acuity Brands talk about their experience. So in our internal communications channel, we're allowing our employees to talk about how racism has impacted them, so that we can hear their voices as a part of it. Racism is a dirty, nasty word. It was really easy for us to get comfortable talking about diversity and inclusion and equity, because there's no pain there. And what we've been able to experience since late spring is a conversation around the true problems, and shedding some light on something that is an ugly reality in our country. And what I love is that communicators were right there helping to navigate their organizations to do this. Not only Black communicators, but my allied friends communicators, we were on the phones talking about how this moment cannot pass and we have to do something about it, and led from the front on a very uncomfortable situation and a very uncomfortable platform, pushing our company and our country to go further. And so for those communicators who are listening, be proud that at this moment you get to continue that wave and create the future that we need and deserve. And that's why I love this profession so much. And I'll tell you just a personal story. I was not doing well. The same week that the George Floyd situation happened, very shortly after, there was the incident in New York and Central Park. And my heart was just broken for a lot of reasons, not only because I have a son but because I was just weary. And I remember that following Monday in a management meeting, speaking with our leadership team and just pouring my heart out to them about this. We cannot let this moment pass. And it turned a corner, not only for our organization, I think, but also for me. I've never really considered myself an active social justice person. I've always focused on doing what's right and being an example for African-American women and African Americans. But I think my pain became a little angry, and we all know about angry Black women, but I wanted to focus it in a way that was very productive. And I have been so proud to see how so many of us in our profession have channeled this shame and disgrace about what's happened to move us to a better place. And I hope that we never stop that. I really do, because it will lead to other great things that we need to address.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and Candace, I definitely relate to what you're saying in terms of channeling that anger. And I always say to myself, to my direct reports, really, how can we channel that anger into action? How can we move mountains, make that positive change? Because so much of what you just said resonated with me. As a daughter of Belgian West African immigrants, I have 3 amazing young Black brothers, and I am constantly thinking about them. They're all over the country, Los Angeles, Miami, Boston. And what you said about just how you spoke to your son and thinking about that reality, that is the reality of the Black PR professional today, beyond the DEI counsel that we're providing to our clients, the strategies that we're accelerating and advancing. There's our real human experience that we bring to this job as we show up as our authentic self. So just wanted to commend you for that vulnerability and know that I feel and share and recognize your sentiment.
And I think that's one of the, sorry, Denise, we have 5 more minutes. We're gonna have to start the next panel. Do you want to go ahead and add? And then I want to move to Troy, an important question, but go ahead, Candace.
I just think it's okay for us to bring our whole self to our profession.
Yes. Agreed.
Yeah. And then for those who hear our stories, to not let them fall on the floor and our tears and our anger be wasted. So if we disclose to you something, then you need to commit to do something about it, right? Don't feel sad and bad. It's not to make our white brothers and sisters, to feel sad and bad, but to move to action and use our words, our tears, our anger to motivate us to change. And I think, Troy, on that note, that motivation to change, you're now moving into this whole, or have been in this whole political world. Has legislation played a role in addressing anti-Black racism, or is it solely up to companies and brands and activists to just do the work? Talk to me about how we can we further legislate our way here?
Yeah, thank you for that, Dr. Ford. The way that I'm viewing it is that one hand washes the other, right? Legislation definitely moves the needle, because legislation, let's face it, it's what has gotten us to the point where we are able to now have equal rights. It's what's gotten us to the point where we are now able to vote. This really comes down to speaking truth to power, right? You mentioned the incident, the death of George Floyd, but part of the reason why George Floyd kind of spurred this national outrage is there's so many factors, right? This is really the first time that you've had criminal justice and policing at the forefront of a presidential election, right? So it was kind of really, really hard to ignore. And something that I always think about, it's something I always tell, my friends, my family, is that when you're voting down ballot, right? The people you're voting for have so much power. DAs get to choose the cases in which they prosecute. There are judges on ballots that people have no idea what they're voting for. For example, myself, I'm running for the New York City Council. On the council, it has oversight over Rikers Island and part of the budget that goes to NYPD. So it's so much that comes from the legislative perspective, but we also cannot discount the fact of the role that the private sector companies do have, right? For many people like myself, personal story, but I'm first gen. I was the first in my immediate family to graduate from college. And as someone who was a first gen college student, I didn't have a network of people who can just call and get me internships and favors. I had to work really hard for it. But more importantly, my job, my career was really the pathway to middle class for me, right? And for so many people, for young Black and brown people, for so many first gen people who are coming into the field, their job in the agency world, their job in the various different roles we hold in the communications industry, this really is a pathway to middle class for us. And it comes down to tackling, hey, are we paying our Black employees equal to our white employees? Another story, when I was at an agency, I won't say what agency, but on the agency side, I remember those of us who were account directors and below, we had a spreadsheet where we kept track of how much each person was making. And we did this on our own. We didn't, no one told us to do this. We did this just to make sure that both the people of color and women were being paid fairly in the agency. And towards the end of my time at that agency, we realized that there was a discrepancy. People of color and women were not being paid equally for the same position and with the same experience as some of our white men counterparts. And so we had to bring that to the agency's attention. But it's little things like that, making sure that equal pay is on the table when you're hiring people for positions, making sure there's also an opportunity for growth. If we're being honest, a lot of people focus on entry level. We always want to recruit from the college, but I always say, like, you can't be what you can't see. If you are recruiting someone and they only get to be an account executive and there's no Black account supervisors, there's no Black account directors, there's no Black VPs, what signal does that young person coming into the industry think that they have for growth? There isn't. So I'm just thinking of all of these various different pieces. One hand washes the other here.
Absolutely, one hand washes the other. And that's why it's a systemic approach, right? We've got to break the systems down. And I think Charlene talked about the system is working. No, we've got to change the system because it may not be working fairly, equitably, et cetera. And so, and Troy, to that point, but if we don't pay the interns, they won't make it to the middle class because they won't be able to get the internship to work for free or an agency that's requiring them to record their hours to bill a client.
Yeah.
So, and it's sad on that note, there are people who drop their membership in the Council of PR firms because they refuse to pay their interns.
Yeah.
That's sad.
And that's where the discrepancy starts. Everyone cannot afford to do an unpaid internship. It's extremely, extremely difficult. It's burdensome on people. But again, that's where the discrepancy starts, right? Because if you don't get that internship experience, how do you build a network if you don't have it? How do you get to meet account directors and people on the agency side who can vouch for you? Otherwise, you're just cold applying. And as we know, people like to hire people that they know. People like to hire people that they're comfortable with. I know this question came up a little bit early in the segment where we asked, is there any challenges that Black people no longer face in the workplace? I say that those challenges just reinvented themselves, right? Before, you can just flat out be told, no, we don't hire Black people. Now it's the instance of you go through 2-3 rounds of interviews and someone tells you you're not the right fit. And so you have to say, well, if I have the credentials, I have the experience, I'm a good writer, I know what I'm doing, I understand these accounts that you're presenting to me, what is the right fit? And I think that's the question that a lot of agencies moving forward will have to ask.
Absolutely. And you guys are the right fit. And you have transformed the hearts and minds of the folks in the audience. And I'm going to get fired from this volunteer thing if we don't move on to the next panel. But I appreciate each of you. You are all rock stars. And I'm looking forward to seeing what happens next as you all continue to make history in our industry. So thank you for staying encouraged and making a difference in your spheres of influence. So thank you again. And we're going to move. I hate to do this because I'd like to talk to you some more, but we got to move to the next panel. So our second panel, again, is another Rockstar panel. I've gotten to know each of these individuals, so I'm super excited that they are here. First is Cedric Brown. He is an independent consultant and has done a lot of social justice work in his years of experience, and I have to little brag. He was my graduate assistant at Newhouse, where he got his master's and earned his APR. And we also have Marvin Hill. Marvin is an external corporate communications leader for Humana, Inc. And Marvin, we got to know each other networking at conferences, and we've been helping each other out along the way. So thank you so much. And Emily Graham,
Thank
super
you.
excited about her progression. She went from being a chief diversity officer for an agency and is now chief equity and impact officer for Omnicom. That is the holding company. So she's responsible for making sure everybody creates some change and some movement in this space. And then we have Deval Hain, and he is with Prosek Partners. He is an account supervisor, and I have just been watching. You don't know when people are watching you. I've been watching you. That's a great agency. We're expecting great things to continue to come from you. So I want each of you again to, we're going to start off with this question. It's a lot of, and I said you guys were going to answer a different question, but a lot of the young people have been typing in about what advice would you give them. So we will start with, how do we pass this along, and what can we do to better prepare students who want, regardless of their race, white or students of color, for these challenges of becoming an anti-racist, or the DE&I challenges that that exist. So maybe each of you can say how long you've been in the industry, and then say, what do you think that we need to do to help students prepare? So we'll start with Cedric. Go ahead, since I introduced you first.
Yeah, Dr. Ford, thank you very much. So my name is Cedric Brown. As Dr. Ford mentioned, I spent a little bit of time at Syracuse University for my master's degree program. I'm currently a digital strategist that's doing a little bit of freelancing. And I've been in the industry for coming up on a decade. What's kept me in communications is just that I'm inspired by the power to use communication to form unity so that we have communities. And as far as, what can we do for our next generation to be able to understand how DE&I works? You always have to look at the past and what you've done and be able to atone for where you come from. Damon talked a lot about this. Racism isn't just the end of slavery in 1865. Slavery ultimately has just been defined into a number of different ways and institutions in our country. So basically, what we have to be able to do, and the Los Angeles Times provided a great example of this. They produced a video where they called out specific instances where they published stories that were harmful and preaching segregation in the Los Angeles area. And they also were freely disclosing their current hiring trends and how long it took them to really be integrated within their staff. So my advice for colleges out there and for students that are looking to learn too is dig deeper into your history. And some organizations that do a great job of this are the Equal Justice Initiative. They were featured in the Just Mercy. I would look at the social media handle for the Blacksonian, the National African American History. What you're being taught in your textbooks is just the surface. You have to do the hard work of going beyond and going deeper.
Marvin, why don't you go next? Thank you so much, Sandra, for sharing those ideas. Marvin, what would be your advice to young people?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Ford. Marvin Hill. I'm an external communications leader for Humana, a large healthcare organization. Lead external communications for our Medicare and Medicaid businesses. Been in the industry, specifically in PR, around 12 years, but I grew up in journalism, worked in the newspaper industry for quite a while, and have worked in HR as well. So, how I would consult with colleges and universities around preparing the next generation of our students is, I would start with, making DE&I courses a prerequisite, for most, if not all majors. So add it to the curriculum. It's you take DEI 101 right along with biology 101. So you infuse it into the curriculum. I would, partner with the career centers at colleges and universities, include innovative training like simulation exercises. So real world exercises of, sitting at a table, having that seat at the table and having those conversations with young students, shouting at them, all of the things that, we may have experienced as a part of our careers, but, giving them an early look at what's to come so that they're better prepared to handle it, once they start working in their careers.
Yeah, I'm really proud of Elon for our president said, we're going to make sure that we require everyone to have a class. So we are working fast and furious to do that. And even the Accrediting Council for Education and Journalism, Mass Communication made that same demand of all of the accredited programs out there to require learning in this space, which was not done. Deval, can you share some advice to young people?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Rochelle, and thank you to the Museum of PR for having this amazing event tonight. I've, over the years had the chance to attend many of them, so it's really nice to be on this side, just with such a great panel. Denvol, I've been in the industry for about 5 years now, spent most of the time with Prosek. And, I think what's kept me in this industry is just the chance to do really meaningful work, between the work that I do within the agency and, working on things like diverse voices with the foundation and even with the Diversity Action Alliance. I've had the chance to meet a lot of really great people and put my talents to what I think is good use. So really appreciate that. What I would say for students entering this industry or, thinking about entering this industry, I think in today's age, one of the most important things you can do is just, consume content, all different types of content, right? Content that challenges biases that you may have about the world, things that may give you a different perspective, or things that may just make you a better communicator because you have a little bit more understanding of how another group of people are viewing a topic or an issue, right? And I think that in today's age where we have so much social media and there are algorithms that are designed to kind of curate the things that we see, we can easily get this very siloed view of the world and certain topics if we don't really stay vigilant on making sure that we are always sort of challenging our biases and the things that we see. And that's even more important when we're talking about the conversation of diversity and inclusion. So I would just agree with everything that Cedric and Marvin said, but also that, take it upon yourself to really go out there and seek the truth and seek things that challenge what you believe, because it'll make you a much better communicator overall.
Thank you for that. And Emily, I imagine that if young people, particularly Caucasians, came in and they understood they could and they knew how to work in a team, would that make them more interesting as a hire? That they have some greater sensitivity, particularly if they are a non-person of color?
Yeah, I think sensitivity and sensibility. I think what I would love colleges to do is equip young people to challenge the status quo more. I would love to see more strategic thinking. I'd love to see people run into things that break their brain so that we can look at solving problems that are difficult and that are challenging. The challenge we face as a nation, as practitioners, is most people don't want to do hard things. Who wants to do something that's difficult? And the young people who are coming into our field are change agents. They are catalysts. They're going to be the ones who are going to keep the guard. And I would like colleges to give them a better sense of how we go about solving for difficult challenges with people who may not always agree with you. And, I started my career as an account coordinator at Burson Marsteller. Shout out to Pat Ford, who has been my mentor for many years. And I left my agency as an executive vice president, senior partner, and went into in-house at Omnicom. And what I see is that you don't unlearn things. You either double down harder as you get older, or you're willing to expand your brain to open up new things. And I would say to this generation of people, just be porous. Expect more. And when you get into the PR industry, it's like a different world. One of my favorite shows from the 80s and 90s, right? It's different than where you came from. I mean, you're not going, if you're a young white male or female coming into the communications industry, chances are you've seen more people who look like you. and they have ascended to levels of leadership. What is your role as an ally? What is your role as an advocate, even as an account coordinator? I mean, you're going to hear and see things that you're not cool with. And how do you use your voice? And how do you use that to not only make the people around you better, but to, again, challenge the status quo? So, Rochelle, I'm so excited about the conversation. I'm looking forward to this conversation. And thank you for having us.
Well, I appreciate you're here, and I think that that's a key thing to lean into. And so, Marvin, I want to go back to you then, and it relates exactly what Emily was talking about. So what can communicators, what role can they play in uniting people around the importance of diversity, equity, inclusion, and breaking down systemic racism?
I would start with, continue to speak up. And, when I look back on my career, I wasn't so confident in speaking up in those occasions where I should have, where somebody, where there was a micro or macro aggression that happened. But this generation that we're in now, they are more confident at a younger age, and they speak up when they should. But continue to speak up, use your voice. We're generally the only one in the room, and because of that, we bring that different perspective. We bring those unique insights, around helping the business to grow. Get involved, connect with the DE&I leader in your company, at your agency. They need your support. So connect with them, join an employee resource group. Not only the African American resource group, but others, women's, veterans, all of these organizations, they need our insights, they need our support, and ultimately we help the business grow, we help our clients and find success.
And I think a key part of that is recognizing that there's intersectionality, right? And, Charlene and others talked about that. Like, I'm a woman and I'm getting a whole bunch of stuff just because of my womanhood, but then I'm an African American. And then if you're a Gen Z, or a young millennial, you're going to get some heat just around your age. And so and then if you're, member of a LGBTQ, community, then that's a whole nother layer of things. And so intersectionality is a piece of it, but you also said serving clients. And I think that's a key thing. Is the reality is America is browning in ways that, we always talked about when 2020 came. Well, guess what? 2020 is here. And if you walk into elementary schools and middle schools and look at the young people, the browning of America has occurred. And you look at the fastest growing demographics, they are brown and Black people from the whole diaspora. And so in understanding that is critical. And so, Deval, I guess one of the questions then I'd like to ask you then is, what then demonstrates to you that a company is serious about making change with Black employees? Like, how do you know that somebody's serious? Like, I know you moved Prozac, but if you were looking for a job, how would you know that they were serious?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. And I think it's like so timely as we enter into this new year, right? Because 2020 is going to go down as one of the most challenging periods in history, both socially and economically. But I think one of the greatest legacies of last year is kind of how it shifted the dynamic of stakeholder capitalism within organizations towards the employee, right? And for that reason, it made issues of diversity and inclusion much more important and something that people are really going to keep an eye on going forward. And for me, I feel like, it's a number of things. First, it's having Black leaders at the table that are really there to kind of champion the cause and ensure that D&I issues don't get put to the back burner, right? Like, we all have seen what happens when diversity and inclusion sort of starts to conflict with other business priorities and how it can easily be tabled. And I think when you have leaders at the helm of an organization or at the top ranks of the organization that's diverse, that really doesn't happen, right? Like, Damon's a perfect case in point here. And, I've been watching Damon and what they've been doing at P&G for years, and he's really never took his foot off the gas. And I think that that's really important, right? And that really only happens when you have someone at that level really kind of championing the cause. The second thing I would say is our organization sort of putting their money where their mouth is in terms of DE&I, right? So is this some extracurricular that's added to someone's full-time day job, or have you appointed a person in a role and, you know, given them the resources that they need to actually move D&I forward in a meaningful way? Is that person, or better yet, that group, you know, plugged into the other areas of the organization, whether that be finance or HR or the line managers, to ensure that DE&I can move forward and it's not on the responsibility of one individual or one unit within the business? And then the last thing I think I would say, and I think that this one, if companies get it right, they'll really be winning, is like this idea of equity versus equality, right? And understanding that there are many people within the organization that, for a number of reasons, they're going to come from various walks of life. And it's not necessarily that we want to have this blanket treatment for everyone that's necessarily equal, but we want to make sure that we're tailoring our resources and our initiatives to the unique experiences that people have and the unique challenges that groups have, so that it really is an equitable environment and everyone is kind of on the same playing field. Like Troy talked about this before, and he talked about how hard it is to get an unpaid internship, right? So should there be initiatives in place for people of color that bring in junior members into the organization that don't have internships, giving them that first opportunity? You know, are there initiatives for mid-level employees that may not have, you know, this massive network because of sort of their background, and are they given a mentor, a senior mentor, someone to really kind of nurture their talents? I think that that is really going to be where DE&I is being taken to the next level in 2021 and beyond, is really that equity point and ensuring that, you know, people are all given a fair shot and given, you know, equal ground to stand on.
Denvol, that is why I said you're one to watch. That was so thorough, and you were right on it, because each of the things you talked about was how do you break down systems, right? Not looking for the right fit, but looking for people who will shake it up some and be different, and creating programs so that people who don't, because, you know, agencies, and Emily can probably attest to this because she's been working in agency a long time, they tend to say you have to have, you know, X, Y, Z and color and ride your bike backwards. And they create all of these job descriptions that it is finding a needle in the haystack. And then to try to find a diverse person to fit that role, it's like impossible. But to your point, Denvol, that you can create other types of opportunities, create systems where mentorship programs incorporate, that you're opening up a wider access point versus just having everyone be cookie cutter, I think is really powerful. So thank you for you said 1, 2, 3, and you incorporated everybody else said. I'm now fangirling you because you're going to be one to watch. And so I guess one of the questions too, Emily, I want to come back to you, is thinking about the experiences of African Americans in our industry, and are there misconceptions that leaders and people, and even young people as they're thinking about the field, are there misconceptions that need to be overcome about Blacks in our industry?
You know, I think it depends on who you're asking. If you are asking a Black person in the industry, like myself, I've been here 15 years and I have not seen exceptions to any rule. I mean, the truth is, there's nothing new under the sun when it comes down to what's possible. So I will start there. I don't think there are any limits to what we can do and what we will do and how we are doing. I mean, if you're talking about how it started and how it's going, this panel, this discussion tonight, if that doesn't give you optimism and inspiration and energy, then nothing will, right? But I do think there's a unique experience that Black people have faced in this industry to get up and mobile and forward. That is hard. I think misconception is that there is not enough Black talent, senior level talent. You will never find Black senior level talent who wants to come and thrive and stay at your organization if your Yelp score is low. And what that means is, what's the word on the street? You know, do you have a reputation and a legacy of cultivating, investing in, and advancing Black talent, because I'm going to pick up the phone and call whomever I know who has any adjacency to working with you to see how you've treated them, how you've treated people I respect. So I think this notion that Black talent is limited at the mid to senior level, I keep hearing that. It's not true. It's just, they may not want to work with you and they might have reasons for that, right? I think another misconception, I want to encourage everyone here that you can't be what you can't see. It's not true. You know, when I started my career at agencies, global, I did not see many senior level Black people. I could count on one hand and half a hand most of my career. In fact, now I'm the only person at the C level at Omnicom that's a Black person. And you know what? I am hoping that that changes, but I want you all to know that you don't have to have a limitation just because you can't see it. You absolutely can be it. I think maybe another misconception is that all the young Black people want to be activists and they're angry and they're rah-rahing and they're difficult to manage. And I just hate it. I hate hearing it. And maybe that is a dirty little secret we shouldn't talk about on a call with mixed company, but I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm sitting at tables where we're talking about promotions and raises and advancements and all the soft skills, and this comes up. It comes up all the time. And I just want to say, the young Black community is not angry and upset. They could be, but what they are is expectant. And we have an opportunity and responsibility to show up for them and to be present. And I just think we have to change the paradigm, and we have to expect more from the agencies and the companies who want this talent. And that's where we are.
I appreciate you saying that, because Black talent, we are out there.
Yeah.
But you're right. You know, when I did my research, this is back in the early 90s, and mid 90s, when I asked my survey recipients, what's the size of your organization? The most frequent response was 1. Why?
Yeah.
Because they said, I would rather be an independent consultant than be disrespected in my company. And so you can hire me back to do the work. I'm just not sitting up in your office. And so there's a lot of amazingly successful people like Cedric doing their own thing, holding up Me Inc. And then this is the challenge, going back to that earlier point, is that the question is, and Denvol, you answered that too, what are you doing to make me want to come inside your organization and lend my talent? And has the organization created the broad enough job descriptions so that when they meet someone like Cedric and you are an awesome company, that you haven't limited yourself with the job description so that Cedric no longer qualifies because he's coming off of amazing job experience of being Me Inc. Because Me Inc. doing great work for other companies ought to still qualify him for vice presidencies and things of his 10 years of experience.
And you won't just jump for the money too, Dr. Ford. That's the other thing. Don't think you can wave a big check in front of people and they'll jump and go readily. People are looking for more. They are looking, you're spending hours working, doing stuff. They want purpose, meaning, and they want commitment that you're going to enrich. And if you're not, you'll take less money to stay somewhere where you're happier and being poured into and see a long-term opportunity than you will short-term gain. So.
And one of the things I heard a lot of you say too is that you don't have to just be mentored by someone who looks like you. A lot of you talked about people who are different genders, different races, and how is that? Like, anyone want to share a story of how that diverse mentorship thing might work? Because a lot of times, and Emily just said that, like, people say, oh, if I don't see it, then I'm not going to come. But maybe you can become the first and open the door for others. So how does that cross mentoring, cross coaching from people who are different races and genders?
So I'd like to go ahead and hop in here. It's funny you bring that up because I wrote about that, and it's going to be published in PRSA's March newsletter for strategies and tactics. Now, I wouldn't really be here where I am today without the help and assistance of multiple mentors. Dr. Ford, if you don't mind, I'll share this story about how I got to DC. You gave me the opportunity to join a luncheon where I was able to meet a white owner of a boutique agency in Syracuse. Then he opened up his Rolodex and told me to contact this person in DC. This person in DC then gave me a list of 25 agencies, the top 25 agencies in DC. Look these up, see what you're interested in. Gave that back to her, and she gave me the contacts at those agencies. And one of them happened to be at Hager Sharp, who I had my informational interview with in May of 2016. There wasn't a position for me then as I was getting ready to finish school, but 7 months later, a position becomes open, and that's where I worked for 2.5 years. So this idea of mentorship and being able to mentor across your identity basically it all comes really down to time. Like, are you truly interested in hearing what somebody has to say? You don't have to prescribe every bad situation that somebody is in. Sometimes we just want people to listen to us. And if you're a white person mentoring a Black professional or Hispanic professional, we definitely don't want your advice and your prescription on issues of racism. If anything, you should listen and, go do further education. And so that's really the main thing we need to think about is don't prescribe the issues of your identity, but just be a listening arm and a listening ear to help with further advancement.
I think you're on mute, Rochelle.
Yeah.
Thank you. I knew that was going to happen. I was doing so well. Now everyone can check off their bingo checklist of a Zoom call. But Cedric, to follow up on that, what do you anticipate will be the cultural landscape for 2021? And what changes do you think we will see on the DE&I and anti-racism front?
What I think will happen in 2021, and kind of what we've been seeing, is because of everybody being enlightened, so we're all cooped up in the house because of COVID. Everybody thinks they're woke now. So we'll see organizations start to hire diverse candidates. Yeah, but what we might not see is, and it might take a bit of time, is getting Black candidates or getting Hispanic candidates, getting an LGBTQ candidate to that senior level of an organization. That's really where we need to go. And you guys have all really brought up this good point, is that, yeah, having a diversity consultant, that's great. What's more powerful is seeing somebody in a high position that's valued not because of their race, but because of the skill set that they bring to an organization. So my hope is that organizations will stop seeing us solely for our skin color, but bring us on because we have the talent that matches your expectations or really can even exceed your expectations. As far as the racial justice front, that looks like, I think we'll continue to have to keep things online. So Color Change is a good organization that is great at mobilizing people through its online platforms, through the use of email newsletters, through subscribing to follow them on social media. They offer unique programming that you can get enlightened on the current issues of race on the day. So what organizations are going to have to do is not just celebrate Black History Month, but find ways to ingratiate Black history into your company's history. And I talk about this in my essay. At some point we have to stop becoming history. We have to become the standard of what the industry and the profession is looking for.
Absolutely. So Marvin, I'm going to close out with that, with you, because I've gotten my warning, and I told you, this free gig, they're going to let me go if I don't keep us on time. So Marvin, when you've worked in a lot of different sectors, right? So are there good lessons to learn that can apply some of the things that Cedric and Emily and Deval and you have already talked about? But are there other sectors that are doing it well that we can learn from?
Wow, I think they're all trying to do it the best they can. But I think two things I'll say. One is that, in all of the industries where I've worked, I've, apart from my role, I've made it my responsibility to get involved in DE&I efforts, right? So I may work in communications. So at Humana, for example, I was at the table when we built our employee resource groups. So I would say, one, no matter what organization or industry you work in, you should work, toward the betterment of the organization. And secondly, I'll say is, and it was said earlier, the organizations that are doing it right have a fuller commitment to DE&I with Black employees. So, right, so from a full employee life cycle standpoint, starting with recruiting and hiring, on to promotion, sponsorship, mentorship, on through, exit interviews. So, organizations paying close attention to the full life cycle and journey of Black associates, I think will help them and improve their DE&I efforts.
And I think that goes back to the power of public relations. We as professional communicators, we have that power to have a seat at the table and to help our organizations move forward, because we're responsible for building and maintaining those mutually beneficial relationships, right? And we're supposed to be operating in the public interest. And so if we're truly operating in the public interest and we're being true to what those corporate values are, which nearly every corporation says they value respect, they value honesty, right? Then we're going to move this needle. And so I really appreciate Emily, Marvin, Denvol, Cedric, as well as the other panelists for participating in this part. And I think we're going to turn it over to Carmella for some additional Q&A and wrapping up this session. And Carmella, hopefully I can keep my gig another year.
I think they'll keep you on, Rochelle.
Thank you.
Well, the insights from this entire evening have been moving, inspiring, encouraging, and informative. I have pages here of notes and quotes. I think the overall takeaway for me was we have come a little ways and we have a long way to go, but the future is so promising. Honestly, the present is promising. We have reached the point in the program where we're opening it up to audience questions. I do see all of your questions in the Q&A box. Before we do that, a few housekeeping items. The recording of this event will be available in the next few days. I saw that was one of the chat box questions. Do drop your questions into the Q&A box if you haven't already. We'll try to get to as many of them as possible in the next 10 to 15 minutes or so. Thank you to the speakers, presenters, panelists, the Museum of PR for such a great program. In addition to our notable guest participants, this incredible event was really made possible by the event sponsors. Again, those are Grady College of Journalism and Mass Communications, University of Georgia, Weber Shandwick, Reagan Communications, Peppercom, the Arthur Page Center, Talkwalker, Cision, the George Washington University School of Continuing Studies, Public Relations and Corporate Communications, APCO Worldwide, the PR Council, Jim Lukashevsky, Joyful Planet LLC, Compro Biz, Bob Veritoni, Renee S. Edelman, and Muckrack. This question comes from Kelly Fuller. It's common for non-marginalized leaders to voice support for DEI. However, often they are far removed from the issues and root causes with a lack of understanding of systemic oppression. How common is it for CEOs to have committed and completed the work needed for self-awareness as it relates to historical constructs of race, white supremacy, unconscious bias, and inclusivity training? I'm curious how often this is happening in the C-suite and would love to hear how this was positioned from DEI leaders to CEOs. That sounds like a question for those of you who have been in the C-suite. So that's the Emily, Charlene, Damon, all of you who have been, Denise, Candace, anyone who's got experience with that.
So I'll speak up. In my instance, when I had this opportunity to engage, I actually raised the question. Over the weekend, I called the CEO and we had a conversation, and I already shared that next Monday. I can't speak to how CEOs around the globe or the country reflected internally in terms of the self-work that they had to do. But what I can say with optimism is that I've spoken to so many of my colleagues and peers in this industry who spoke with their CEOs and felt encouraged that they were doing the right things. And when I joined the company that I'm a part of now, I was really proud that someone on my team during our first introduction, she said to me, listen, Candace, everything that's happening right now, we're having real conversations here. And when everything went down, you know, I spoke to the CEO and he personally spoke to me, so I feel it's real. And so I've already shared that I'm an optimist. So I believe that, you know, in many cases, it may have been the DEI, you know, leader who brought it, but in my experience was a lot of communicators who were around the table who actually called the question.
And I think one of the things that many times people don't understand is the close chemistry that's required for success as a communications counselor, and that requires sometimes you stepping into conversations that even when, you know, they don't call you, you call them, right? And the trust and the credibility that you establish allows you to be brought into those conversations. And because I think we play that connectivity role, that's really where we have to step in and make sure that we are really deeply connected to what's happening, that we present a different level of understanding. And when no one else is telling other folks in the C-suite the reallys, that's our job, right? It's our job to make sure that they see the reality of the situation as it is, not as, you know, we wish it to be. And that has to do with DEI, and that has to do with many other issues. So I think that's just a muscle for people who are developing in this industry. Really, how do you go in and earn that seat at the table, but earn the credibility to really lead through some of these difficult discussions.
And I would also say to be comfortable with being courageous, just to share your voice, because you're going to be speaking in many cases from a perspective because of who you are that people have no comprehension of what it's really like. And that's okay too.
Yeah, and CEOs are people. I mean, I've reported to 3 in my career so far, and I will say that the first thing that I try to do is relate to people. That's really how communicators get to start telling stories. We have to understand the perspective of people, the audiences that we're trying to reach. And, you know, DE&I is personal. I have not met one C-suite leader that just because they're a white male or a white woman or a Black man, they're a monolith. They feel differently. You know, I've had a leader who grew up in the rural South. He felt something different than a leader who grew up in London. They just have different perspectives. And I think our role is to be able to understand dimension and complexity and know that people respond to things differently. And like Damon said, trust is priceless. And it's going to be required in order to have the difficult conversations and to connect with people and to keep connecting with people. I don't think it's complete. I think the question said, have they completed the work? I don't think there's ever a completion of the work. I think the work is open-ended, ongoing, required, and rigorous. And I think you have to keep just showing up.
I would jump in and just agree with that. And I'd say from just some of the clients that I've worked with, I've seen more CEOs now show an interest in really understanding the issues and the problems and also the solutions than I've seen previously in my career. So I think, you know, to echo what Candace and Damon and Emily has said, you know, I think CEOs are recognizing that now is a time to approach leadership with compassion and humanity and empathy. And those are the characteristics that make the difference today in connecting with your people and in getting the engagement that's required to be successful.
Awesome answers. Thank you. Good question, Kelly. Next question, and I'm sorry if I mess up your name. This question comes from Harmon Tomas. This question is for Sabrina, actually. Well, really for all the panelists, but targeted to Sabrina. When you think back on how people you worked with were allies to you, what did they do successfully or unsuccessfully? For those of us who don't have lived experiences of being Black in America, how can we be better allies or more intentional and mindful of our allyship? So I think there's another question very similar to this. You know, what can allies start doing and what can they stop doing? Can you answer that for us, Sabrina?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Carmella. Thrilled to be here and just participate in the Q&A. I would say the most critical thing for allies is to listen with the intent to understand versus the intention to respond. Over the course of the decade, I've had many allies who are really coming from an intentional place where they want to align with my experience, understand my experience, but most importantly, listen. I've also had allies who approach it from the lens of, I have Black friends, I buy Black brands, I support Black small business, I can't be racist. It's really, really understanding from the lens of empathy, but more importantly, from the lens of listening. You don't want to invalidate your Black colleagues' experience, your Black consumers' experience, your Black stakeholders' experience. You want to listen. You really want to align yourself with the real issues that are impacting them, because there's what you think matters to the Black community, and then there's what actually matters. And that really helps in terms of building and sustaining that allyship. So I would say that is one of the most critical things. And then in terms of things that allies have done wrong, I mean, we'd be here until 9 o'clock. There's so many key lessons and takeaways for executives, for agencies as they approach allyship with the Black community, the Latinx community, really diverse groups across the board. And I would say one of those most critical ones is meeting your employees where they are versus where you want them to be. Just because you have a diversity and employee team, just because you have an employee resource group, that doesn't mean that the trauma, the tension that your Black colleagues or other diverse employees are dealing with in your agency will automatically disappear. You really need to look at these tools as part of the bigger strategy, the broader approach to your solidarity and your allyship with the Black community. I think agencies who have done this wrong, they've been publicly criticized and denounced. Agencies who have done this well, their allyship really has resonated with individuals like myself, shout out to BCW, but also the broader Black community at large. So I would say overall that allyship is not a trend, it's action, it's commitment, and it's for the long term.
Thanks, Sabrina. Someone in the comment section said it best. That was an excellent response. Allies need to lean outward and decenter themselves. Listening is a skill we need to work hard on. So thank you for that answer. The next question comes from Susan Vernon Devlin. I've been in the PR business for 2 decades. I would like to have a mentor, a sponsor, and a coach, even at this stage of my career. How do I find those 3 assets for my work life?
So to clarify, they want to mentor somebody, or they want to?
They would like to have a mentor, a sponsor, and a coach. So for themselves, even at that stage of their career.
It's really just about putting yourself out there, I would say. You know, events like PRSAs, international conferences, and all the virtual events that they're doing. Your opportunity to get to meet new people. There's other PR and communications and marketing related associations out there too, that you can have the opportunity to be in front of new people. And that's kind of going back to when we're talking about DE&I too, is if you're not coming from this space, yeah, you don't have to have the lived experience, but go outside of your box to be able and be willing to learn something different. And don't be ashamed and don't feel too bad if you get it wrong. If we're telling you you're getting it wrong and we offer to correct you, be coachable to that. So, you know, the same way that you can find a mentor, it's the same way you can find an executive coach and find a sponsor as well. Just putting yourself out there.
You know, and I would just add to that and say, you know, don't be afraid to reach out, even to reach out to people you don't know. You know, I've had people hit me up on LinkedIn and say, hey, I don't know you, you know, you don't know me, but here's what I'm about. And I'd love to just have, you know, a virtual cup of coffee, or I just love to talk to you about your career. And sometimes a mentorship can be one conversation. Sometimes it can last for years. But you know, we're communicators. If we know nothing, we know how to reach out to people that we don't know and talk to them. So don't be shy about doing that. I think that often sponsors work better if they're within your organization, because they are the ones who are having the conversations when you aren't in the room, and you want them to be your advocates. So I tend to encourage people, and even myself when I was in corporate, I looked for sponsors and champions within my organization. But I don't believe so much in the formal mentor-mentee programs and companies that are going to match you up with someone. I've really never seen that work out well. It really has to be a bit more organic. But I also say, when you approach someone to mentor you, be clear on what it is that you're looking for from them, so that you can use their time wisely, and they can give you the best that they have to offer to help you in the areas that you're looking for assistance.
Charlene, one of the things I found with sponsors is that your work is what makes them interested in you. So you have to demonstrate excellence, confidence. And when you have demonstrated that and they have seen you, that's when they're going to be like, oh yeah, look at Charlene, she's amazing, right? They're going to speak on your behalf, or when an opportunity comes, they're going to, your name is going to pop up in their head. But if you're not seen, right, then people, you don't know you to begin to recognize you. And I think that that is something that is oftentimes not a comfortable thing for young people or for Blacks, is to own your excellence. And not be boastful, but if it was your idea, it needs to be known that that came from you, like that you wrote this.
Absolutely, because it will too often be assumed that it did not come from you. And you need to be aware of that. And just a little bit more on what you were saying, Rochelle, as far as a sponsor is concerned, keep in mind that when someone decides to be someone else's sponsor, they're using their credibility as well. They're putting their credibility on the line for you. So sponsors take their roles very seriously. And if they choose to sponsor someone, they expect something from you. They expect you to perform, if not overperform. But they'll be the first ones to hold you up when you do.
And one of the great pieces of advice when we talk about that mentor-mentee or sponsor-sponsor relationship is just being coachable, being willing to lean in to learn from your mistakes. One of the things that I look for in people that I mentor and I sponsor is, are they open and receptive to feedback, not just from me, but from people throughout the organization? Are they the type of person that people want to pour in, that they want to learn from, that they want to just know is constantly getting better? So as you think about, people say, well, you mentor me. Well, what is it that you want from a mentor, right? And when you ask for that, be willing to take that advice, listen to that advice, even when it's difficult to hear sometimes, and make sure that the people who are mentoring and sponsoring you know that you're acting upon that, right? Because people pour into people that they find that they get a return into.
Thank you. How do you reach people in your organization that are not interested in equality within the workplace or their life?
Not everyone's going to want to be on the bus, and that's just that's just the way it is. You can't bring everybody along. And I think that when that happens, a company has to decide, or the individual has to decide, if that's the place where they want to be. And the company has to decide if they're who they want in their company. And I think it's really coming down to that.
It's called a movement for a reason. It's because it has to move. It cannot stand still. And that requires you to make a decision. Are you walking or are you standing still? I had a client ask me the other day, how do we make our tent bigger so that we have more people feel like they're a part of what we're trying to do with DE&I and we don't isolate? And I said, well, your tent is not going to stop people from feeling isolated. You can make it as big as Texas. It's not going to change the way people see themselves. We can't change people's hearts. That has to be a conscious effort and decision. It's attitudes, it's behaviors, it's think, believe, feel, do, right? We're communicators, we know that construct. So for me, I think it's about making a declaration. What you can do is let people know where you stand. What you can do is let them know what is required, and they can make a decision to opt in or not. I think we waste precious time when we try to get everybody. Sometimes you got to get those who are willing to go, and they will be influenced by those who went.
But you have to try.
And I think the other thing we have to recognize is those people that we can't change, we have to make sure that we don't allow them to make us small, because that's part of what we're trying to do.
That's right. That's right.
And don't ever, ever give away your power by what they are trying to do. So this goes back to Carter G. Woodson and Black history. He did not listen to those white historians that were trying to denigrate Black achievements. So today we still have to do that work, and we have to own our own power and not give in to those who are trying to belittle us, trying to ignore us, and trying to impede our progress.
I keep saying this, but I think we still have to try, because the one thing about the human experience is growth. And so while I do believe that some folks may have to be canceled, you have to give them an opportunity to walk before we just shut them out.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, you never know what you may have planted that day. It might get watered by somebody else and they may grow and change at another point.
Takes time. Change takes time. A lot of time. It does.
Indeed. I've been given the go-ahead to ask one more question, and I actually wanted to direct this question to Denise, if you don't mind. Can you just talk a little bit about the importance of history, specifically for this month and for Black professionals, but just in general, why is history so important for us to learn?
So part of the reason, and I alluded to this earlier, is that history keeps people and events alive. And history, the other thing that it does is it gives us a framework for the work that we still have to do. So if we go back to Black History Month in 1926, Black History Week, and look at where we are today, we're still at a month. We're still at a month. And soon we'll be at 50 years from when it was a month. So can we move to a year where we are integrated within all US history? So it is important, number one, to know where we came from. It's also important to know the work that we still have to do. And it is also important to know that those who came before us give us often the impetus and the will to go on, because we look at what they did and we say, yes, look at what they did. We have hard work as well. But as the theme, one of the themes for tonight, change is hard. It takes a long time. It's taken a little bit too long because some of the mistakes of the past were never rectified. Never, ever, ever rectified. So the United States, from a historical standpoint, from a social standpoint, an economic standpoint, a legal standpoint, is doing some of the same things that it did 50 years ago, 60 years ago, and 400 years ago. So it is important for us not to lose sight of that, because it gives us a foundation of the work that we still have to do. And the other thing that we need to recognize is that we are all of you on this panel, everybody listening in, you are all history makers. You are all pioneers. As I said before, you are making history tonight for the next generation. So recognize that, own that, and be proud of your accomplishments.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. This has been an amazing panel. There are a couple of unanswered questions. I think they're all really important. Please feel free to reach out to any of the panelists here on LinkedIn. No one is going to turn you down. At the very least, they'll answer your questions. They might open up for a virtual coffee. You have some great questions in here. Have the courage to kind of step up and ask them. Thank you to all of the panelists, speakers, presenters. You have really, really given an amazing, insightful program this evening. This incredible event was made possible by our event sponsors. Again, those are Grady College of Journalism and Mass Communication at the University of Georgia, Weber Shandwick, the George Washington University Graduate School of Political Management, Reagan Communications, Peppercom, Page, aka the Arthur Page Society, Talkwalker, Cision, Georgetown University of Continuing Education, Public Relations and Corporate Communication, APCO Worldwide, the PR Council, James Lukashevsky, Compro, Joyful Planet, Bob Veritoni, Renee S. Edelman, and Muckrack. This wouldn't be able to be possible without the sponsors. The Museum of PR and the Diversity Action Alliance are both nonprofit organizations to which you can donate. But thank you everyone for your attendance. I hope this was inspiring, insightful. Interact with us on social media, on LinkedIn, Twitter, with hashtag #BlackPRHistory or hashtag #PRHistory. And thank you again, everyone, for your insights, for your questions. This has been an amazing evening.